Yes. All right, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Talking Trout, or should I say Talking Carp. We're putting a new twist on things tonight. It's the middle of winter, and we've been thinking about warm thoughts, and we thought, why not try carp fishing and see what that's all about. So we got a great guest on tonight, Luke Annear, who's a guide for carp, specifically in southern Wisconsin, and I'm excited. Carp fishing is not something that I have a lot of experience doing, so I'm hoping to learn a few things. You got some experience? Yes. That's good. At least somebody in the family knows what we're doing. So I'll just remind everybody, if you can keep yourselves on mute while Luke is talking, that would be great. And then if you have questions, if you look at the bottom of your screen, you should see a little button that says chat. So if you just hit that chat button and the little box will pop up, as we're going along, just type your question in the chat box. And when Luke's finished with his presentation, we'll go back and we'll try to answer as many of those as we can. So with that, I'm gonna turn it over to you, Luke, for an introduction in your presentation. So thanks.
Sure, sounds good. Thanks, Mike. Welcome everyone. I'm gonna pull up my screen here so you guys can see pictures and see everything. Oops, there we go. So yeah, like Mike said, I'm trying to think warm thoughts too. I'm embracing winter while I can, doing some other things, but tying flies has me looking forward to warmer weather. So I'm going to kind of talk through, I'm going to kind of talk through a season of carp fishing, or a season of kind of what carp do. And the one thing I'm going to start out with that you just saw, because I briefly flipped ahead, is kind of my first rule of carp fishing. That's the one thing that I want everybody to walk away with. If you've never carp fished before and you're thinking about going off and trying it, it's the one thing that I think that is the most important. And then the rest of my talk will be sort of stepping through what does a season of carp fishing look like, when can you start targeting them, how late can you target them, and how do you target them. So the first rule, and this seems exceedingly obvious, but carp are just different. And the first rule is the fish needs to see your fly. Carp they can be really similar to fish we're familiar with, but as a general rule, they're much different than fish that we're familiar with. They typically aren't sitting waiting to ambush something. They are usually moving around, sometimes faster, sometimes slower, often kind of grazing. They take advantage of whatever food is nearby and around, and they're typically not on the hunt for something. So you really need to get a fly in front of them. And so you can see the second bullet point I have there: unless they move for your fly or move away from it, assume they haven't even seen it, even if it seems like you've got it right there. And one thing I do when I'm fishing, one thing I tell people in my boat to do, is keep presenting until you know they've seen it. Sometimes it takes 5 or more shots of what you think might be an obvious presentation that they've seen. So that's the rule I like to start with. And then from here, I'm going to just kind of move on and talk about what carp do through the season. Talked about that guiding principle. So I'll start with ice out and early pre-spawn. That kind of takes us from usually March through late April. And then I've got late or mid-April, and then late pre-spawn and spawn is sort of like maybe the end of April, and then into May until they spawn. And then anytime after spawn or after is kind of starting to feel like early summer. I'll spend a little bit of time then talking about midsummer and mulberry season. Maybe you guys have heard about that before. That's kind of something that carp are known for, being fruit eaters and just taking advantage of what's around. Then once we get past that, we're into late summer, often with the lower flows. So I'll talk about what fishing for carp looks like at lower flows, at least for me. and then get a little bit into early fall. I won't spend a ton of time on later fall. I can chat about it or give my thoughts on it. But we'll mainly go through early fall. So I started out saying the fish needs to see your fly. And then I've got here, I usually go as a general rule 6 inches from the fish's face. If the water is a bit dirty, you might need to get a little bit closer. Then there's a paradoxical aspect to carp fishing, to your general carp fishing. There are a number of different places to target carp. The Great Lakes are a notorious place to target carp. That's a place where carp will chase flies down, and bigger flies. But that is not the general rule of carp fishing. And so when you're faced with this situation of needing to get a fly that close to a fish's face, but also the fact that if you just cast and plop a cast on their head, you're going to spook them, what's the solution? And the solution that carp anglers all over the world have found is a presentation called the drag and drop. This is one of those techniques in fishing that one of my friends put really well, where he says it's simple, but it's not easy. And so the drag and drop is simply casting the fly intentionally several feet away from the fish, and then dragging or steering your fly, on or near the surface of the water. And then once it's going to drop into that 6-inch range or whatever range is appropriate for the clarity of water that you're fishing, that's when you let it drop. And you don't let it drop until it gets to that point where it's going to drop into the fish's dinner plate. And I usually like to have that place be, I don't know if you guys can see me, but somewhere kind of in front of its eyes, but not straight in front of its nose. They can have a bit of a blind spot straight in front of their nose. And so you're generally dropping it right next to its face, just a little to the side. And one crucial thing there is you often see them turn their head just a little bit. And that's when they've gone for your fly and probably have it in their mouth. I think someone's got their camera muted or mic unmuted, unless they've got a question. Feel free to drop it in the chat. So that's the initial approach to carp fishing. There's all sorts of situational things that you end up running into, and we can deal a little bit more with specifics of that if you guys have some questions. But it's really a very subtle game of presentation. So if you're someone like me where you appreciate the subtleties of like a fastball pitch moving just a few inches up at the last moment, this might be something that you find yourself enjoying, where it's really just the subtleties of the game. I've got a video here that I'm going to share. And this is a video that demonstrates this drag and drop technique a little bit. So I'm going to leave it to him to explain just a little bit. This gives you an idea kind of what it looks like. You can see he's literally got a dinner plate knifed into the, he's using a screwdriver, just stuck into the silt, and you can see how he presents it. So I'm going to switch my audio to make sure you guys can hear that. And then I will go ahead and play it.
Hello, I'm Dave from Fly Carping. Today I'm going to show you the drag and drop presentation. The drag and drop presentation is an awesome tool for catching carp. It's the best way that I know of getting around the dinner plate paradox. And what I call the dinner plate paradox is the fact that typically in order to catch a carp, you need to present the fly very close to its head. But at the same time, if you actually cast a fly within 6 inches of a carp's head and it hits the water, the carp's going to spook and you're not going to catch that fish anyways. So you're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. You got to get the fly close. You can't get the fly close. So what do? You do the drag and drop presentation. And the basic principle of it is really simple. Instead of casting directly with the carp, you cast past the carp, draw the fly across the top of the water column until you get it where you want it. Drop the rod tip, give it some slack, and let the fly drop right in front of the carp. Like I said, it's really simple, and we're going to show you some of the details right now. Okay, so now some details about the drag and drop. First thing to understand is that it's much more of a lob cast than it is an overhand cast. Right now I'm doing a kind of a water drag, boom, and I want just the fly to land. So I don't really want my tippet to land on the water and scare the fish. That's the whole point of the drag and drop, is to land away from the fish. So it's much more of a lob cast than it is an overhand cast. Okay, so what that means is you're looking from the side. My rod has much more of an arcing pattern than it does a straight back and forth pattern you do for a classic overhand cast. Okay, so if I'm going to overhand cast, let's try and do it. I've got much more of an arcing pattern, more break of the wrist. Okay? And just, if I do that, just my fly lands first. I'm essentially lobbing the fly there. That breaks down at distance. The further away you get, the less you can lob it. It just doesn't work. That's part of why the drag and drop only works at close range. Okay, so once again, I'm going to kind of lob the fly. And just the fly is going to land. Let's see if I
All right, I'm just going to stop it there. I just wanted to show you guys a little bit of an example of what that looks like. If you guys have more questions about that, we can definitely chat about that at the end. Just drop a question in the chat, and and we can cover it then. So now I'm getting into the seasons here. So we're really not that far away from you know, some of the first opportunities to target carp in Wisconsin here, and that is ice out. There are going to be some places, you know, maybe below dams or near warm water outlets at lakes, things like that, where you might be able to catch carp throughout the season. But, you know, if you've driven around lately, I guess we did have a 40-degree day yesterday, but if you've driven around lately, a lot of water is locked up. So I'm really talking about after the ice is out, what do you do? So when it's early season, the water's way under 50 degrees. Fish accessibility is just less consistent, and targeting them this time of year is really about accessibility. And there's some key factors to finding fish and being able to catch them. So key factors to finding them right away in the early season is having just the right amount of depth. They tend to be grouped up on backwaters. That's where I tend to find them early in the season. And they're not just anywhere on the backwaters, especially right away. They're in the deepest scoops of those backwaters. And it doesn't have to be a big depth difference. A couple inches or a foot makes a big difference. But if it's kind of 2 feet or more, and there's the right bottom substrate, those are key factors that will decide whether or not fish are going to be there. And the terms that I often use in the boat are depth and dark and temperature. Just a little bit of dark bottom will help that absorb some heat, and the fish are going to want to be there. And like with a lot of fishing in the early season, you know, picking your warmer days are going to give you better days to find them. So if it's been, you know, 30 degrees out and then you've got a high 30 degrees day, you know, you're going to have a better time then. And here's just a few shots of what these backwaters might look like a time of year. So in this case, fish might not be right on the edges by the cattails. That might be a later season type of thing. They're probably going to be grouped up out in the middle. Same goes here. If you guys can see this well, you'll kind of see some algae floating in this picture. Those are the spots you see on there. Things like that, as you're getting into an area, might help you see that there's going to be some detritus in the bottom that the fish might like early in the season. And this is just a sight I always like to see in the spring when the pelicans come back to this area. Just a cool thing to see, no springs moving along. I'm not going to say a whole lot more about ice out. It can be a really fun time of year. There can be a lot of bigger fish caught. And I think there's something fun to catching fish when they're a little cooler. But I'll move into active pre-spawn, which is kind of late April to early May. This is when the water is getting in the mid to upper 40s, or especially 50 degrees plus. The fish are a lot more active. You're not having to deal as much with just finding them in the deeper spots on flats and in groups. Now you're going to find fish more spread out. You're going to find them up against cattails on the bank, different areas. If the water has come up and the fish can spread out, a lot of the time they will be spread out at this point. And it can be a lot more fun finding fish. This is also a time where you're going to need to pick and choose targets a little bit. Not all fish might be interested in eating. I think one really interesting aspect to fishing for carp is, unlike a lot of species we fish for where we're reading the water, with carp, especially in sight fishing situations, you're reading body language just as much as anything. And so that's just something that especially comes with time. But if fish is really exhibiting eating behavior, that's obviously a fish you're going to want to target. And then you start to get a sense of which fish that are swimming around might be interested in eating a fly and which ones won't. But a great starting point is just cast the fish that you see. Put the fly in front of their face, make sure they've seen it. If they want to eat it, they're going to eat it. And if they don't, they'll probably spook, and then just move on. And you start to hone your skill at reading those fish's body language. And then the last thing during this time, and as we get into the spawn, the fish are kind of becoming social. Carp are really social animals, and they'll swim around on their own. And then sometimes right when you're about to make a presentation on a fish, it'll join up with a couple other ones. And me and my friends have just started calling this forming an alliance, where it's like they're allying themselves against your fishing advances or something like that. So I always try to avoid alliances or groups of fish as they're swimming around. They tend to be ones that are kind of acting social and doing things, getting ready for the spawn. And in my experience, they often will not eat. It happens. It can happen. If it's your only good shot, go ahead and take a shot. But finding a solo fish is generally a better option this time of year. And this is just what some of these backwaters can look like early in the season, where things are just starting to get green. If I see a backwater like this and it's 50-degree day, I'm going to be feeling pretty good about finding some fish. And then this is from early May this last year. You can see there's just a ton of silt stirred up as he's fighting a fish here. This was where we had kind of gone a couple of backwaters back off the main channel of a river, and we're finding fish, some swimming around solo, some swimming around in groups. It was right on the verge of that about to spawn kind of activity, but lots of fish ready to eat. And that's what you'll find in that immediately pre-spawn period. So the spawning period is something that probably a lot of us have seen, where, we've got a lake or a river nearby, and holy cow, you should have seen all the fish that were here last week, right? They're up on the banks, they're flopping around. Carp are pretty interesting spawners. And it can actually look a lot like smallmouth or largemouth buffalo if you have buffalo in a river near you or a lake near you. Often the spawning behavior can look similar, spawning in vegetation on a backwater. During this period, don't get distracted by the spawning fish. So spawning can really help you notice where fish are, but once you know where the fish are, it's looking for, again, solo fish hanging out by themselves. That's the key to catching fish at this time of year. The fish that are spawning are generally not going to be interested in eating a fly, and they're going to be moving so fast, getting a fly into their target area, close to their face so they can see it, is almost impossible. So you're looking for solo fish, and the presentations that you're dealing with this time of year are just those standard presentations for carp, a drag and drop, or if you get close enough, just dropping a fly next to their face. Or if you got clear water and you can cast a little bit further, you can do a little bit of a hybrid between a standard cast where your fly line lands on the water, but you're dragging the fly into position. And this is when a lot of the bigger fish are caught every year. So bigger fish get up onto the flats and into those spawning areas. And so this was a 16-pound carp that my friend Nathan caught last spring. But this is when they're up, and if you can find those solo fish off to the side, especially look for bigger tails that might indicate a bigger fish, it can be a great time to just catch some tanks. This was the biggest fish that I've been fishing for a long time, and a 20-pound fish is a great benchmark fish. Really depends on the water that you fish, how often you get them. This was the largest fish I've seen in freshwater that was not on Lake Michigan. So a fish like that is a true trophy. That one weighed at 23 pounds. But generally, I consider anything over 10 pounds is a pretty great fish. As far as river carp go. If you got questions about sizes, we can chat about that later, but average is about 6-7 pounds or so. So once we're done with the spawn, we're into the early summer period, and really at this point, it's just fair game. So if you're looking to get out carp fishing for the first time, you're wanting to go out on your own, or maybe you've got a body of water near you that you weren't sure about, watching that spawn period, which is often early May to early June. It really just kind of depends. It can be really variable. Finding fish during the spawn can help you know where they might be, but once you're into early summer, fish spread out, and so and they're just going. So this is a great time to go out and walk banks. Treat it a lot like still hunting, where you're patiently moving along, and this is a good time to see what the fish are up to. You might just see a little bit of dimpling along the bank or something like that. You might see tails sticking out. You might see lips sticking out. When I'm out and about in this type of situation or this time of year, I'm just looking for any disturbances in the water. That's something you might see from distance. If you're up closer, you might see the fish. But the fish are just in their routine for summer. Fishing's consistent. This is a time where I hope that the waters may be still a little high from spring. For me, with my program, that's when there's just a ton of fun to be had, where the fish are going and you can get into all sorts of cool backwaters and really do some cool exploration. And you might have a little bit of spawning still going in the early season. I'm not exactly sure what the science says. Some people talk about fish respawning or maybe spawning multiple times over a summer, or it might even just be exhibiting spawning like behavior, but not exactly spawning. But you might see some of that still in the early summer. I know I did last year. It lasted quite a while, where I might see them spawning on one backwater one day or week, and the next week they'd be spawning on a different backwater. This is just kind of a satellite image of what some of these places look like this time of year, or what I hope they look like this time of year, where you've just got expansive backwaters to explore. And it's one of the coolest things I think there is about carp fishing, especially if you're on a body of water that has backwaters like the Wisconsin River. I mainly guide the Rock River system, and there's you can just get lost. There's just really cool stuff to check out. And I think some of the scenery you see, oh, I thought I had a different slide coming up after that. Some of the things you see this time of year are just, they're just really cool. Okay, sorry, I see I've got a video next. So I'm going to show you guys that. This is a little bit of a look at what it looks like sneaking up on some carp and presenting to them. So this is in the summer period where they're past their spawn. And I'm about to push a friend up on a carp that's feeding kind of right in some trees. And you'll see he doesn't do the the drag and drop in terms of an overhand lob cast. He does what I call a pendulum swing, where you're using the weight of the fly to just swing the fly forward and get just a little bit more of a reach than you would with your 9-foot rod if the fly was hanging just straight down. Sorry, one second. I'm going to switch the audio here. Oh yeah, excellent work, dude. That was sweet. That just gives you a little bit of an idea what it might look like. Just for the record, that was not my boat. So typically I have a grab bar up in the front. We typically don't stand on the bow cap, or sometimes you might, but I just that was just something I wanted to say too. In case you're ever thinking about a trip, wondering what it might look like. So that was my buddy's boat. This then is kind of what some of these backwaters look like from ground level or from water level. So this is actually a backwater that was in the satellite image that I showed. Now you guys are all on Google Maps trying to figure out where to go. But there's just these cool situations. I think that's one of the greatest thing about carp is they're kind of like pike when the water's high. You know, you hear these stories about pike in drainage ditches trying to spawn. Carp are just really similar, where they spread out as the water lets them, and you can just find them in some really cool places. This is a great fish that we caught one day out of my old raft that I used to fish out of, where we were kind of wandering down this little side channel thinking that we were at the end of it, and it turned out into this gateway to this really cool backwater where carp were everywhere. So there's just this really neat exploration aspect that I think is so cool. Here's that same guy that was in the video getting a fish, clearly trying to work a knot before it goes through his guides, and just in a nice full backwater. So once we get a little bit later in the summer, well, really not even too late. So the berry season is one of the most interesting things about carp, I think. My friend Dan Frazier phrases it that carp are generalists as a species, but then they can just specialize really well. And one thing they're really good at is taking advantage of whatever food is around. And for a solid month or more in the summer, they are absolutely keyed in on eating berries falling into the water if they're available. Fish are obsessed with them. You can see I've got a picture of a catfish here. Catfish love them too. And this presents some really atypical opportunities as carp tend to go, where you've got opportunities to blind cast. If you don't see a fish under a berry tree, it is a great opportunity to just slap some berries down and see a fish come up looking, because they often will. But you're also going to have situations where you see the fish under the trees, and you know, you're just sight fishing a mulberry dry to carp. So they really are lured by the sound. So it's a bit of a different dry fly situation where you're not going for a soft landing. You're actually wanting it to splat a bit so they hear it. And then I've got some videos that just show a bit what this looks like. And there's actually no sound to these, so I'm just going to play them. And so you can see the carp just popping up, that dark shape there. And this is the time of year where if you see a fish, just splat it close to its head. It's probably not going to scare it. All of the carp rules pretty well go out the window. And if you're wondering, this fish did break me off. So that was one angle. This is actually a shot catching it on a dropper. So if you're on a river with current, berry fishing, I describe it as just very fly fishy. So I'm standing in current, fishing to an eddy. So you need to mend. You need to do kind of all the skills that I think can be really fun to acquire as a fly angler. Getting drag-free drifts. One thing that carp really cannot do is eat a fly that is dragging. If you've got a mulberry dry fly that is going downstream, they will try their best to eat it, and they cannot do it. Their brains cannot make the computation to try to eat something that has drag on it. So in this case, I'm fishing mulberry with a dropper under it and doing my best not to get any drag on it so that fish can eat. And then don't worry, this is not all in slow motion. It'll speed up here, but just fun situations like that. So if you're good at spotting mulberry trees, this can be a fun thing to do along a local waterway where you're out looking for trees, looking for fruit, and seeing what you can make happen under it. And this was not a large fish, but there are no wet socks when it comes to berry season. They are all on a sugar high and just fight like crazy. Here we go. This is a fun one. So, and this really shows just how aggressive they can be. It's not the best picture I have of how aggressive they can be, but you'll get fish coming back multiple times for berries. So you'll see this fish miss it on its first shot and then come right back for a second shot. And you'll see it right between these two pieces of grass here. And so that was a situation where, we didn't see a fish there, but just cast it under a tree, let it splat, let it sit, and wait for fish to come up. And then if you're fishing with a friend, this is the best time of the year to get doubles. You get located under a mulberry tree in the right spot, time it out. Mulberry trees are often good for several fish. And then, like I said, catfish are eating berries at this time too. This surprises a lot of people. It surprised me when I first learned it. But if you're interested in catching a catfish on the fly, this can be a really great time to do that too. So then once we start getting out of berry season, we're into the latter part of summer. We're definitely well into the dog days. Berry season really starts to slow down once you get to the back half of July, mid to back half of July, just depending on exactly where you are. And a lot of the standard fishing resumes where you're doing drag and drops, you're sight fishing, finding fish, feeding actively along the banks and things like that. And unless you get good midsummer rain that kind of brings the river level up or lake level up where you are, a lot of this is fishing the banks and down wood in the channels as opposed to flooded flats and backwaters. Here I've got a bit of a clip of what this can look like. So there's a little bit of water up into this kind of duck potato here. But this is a clip that shows just an aggressive July carp back out of water. And we're just creeping up as slow as we can. And this was actually my friend Jeff's, I think, second carp that he ever caught. So he was pretty new to it, but just tried to let his fly swing out there and get it. And then I see him getting a bit short on time. So I will try to wrap it up after this. But this is a visual worth seeing, I think.
Thankfully, he swam. Oh, yeah. Holy shit.
So that was a case of a fish that was just very ready to fly. It was not spooked by a plop at all and was just ready to go for it. That's not always the case, but it's always fun when that happens. Here's just a few gratuitous fish shots of late summer fish. I think that was the fish that we had just seen. Just to quickly talk about early fall, late summer type situations. A lot of the time in mid to late August, we start getting cool downs. We might start getting a little more rain. I love this time of year when the water might come back up a little bit and you get those backwaters reopening up and some of the vegetation that's grown in the summer in low water conditions all of a sudden has water in it, and the carp just love that. So looking for flooded vegetation late summer, early fall when the water comes back up is really rewarding. Finding fish moving in and out of vegetation. And then before I finish up, I just thought I'd give kind of overview of my program in general. I really just run in the summer. April and May is kind of a conditional basis, just depending on conditions, because I want to make sure that people have a good experience. And then September through October, again, conditional, but June through August is that summer period where, in general, whether you want to fish with me or go out and fish with some friends or try to give it a shot on your own, if I was to tell somebody a good time to go, it's really any time in the summer. Carp are just on a steady feeding kick. And then you can see the bullet points there, different types of things that I do, but I'm going to skip this. I'd just like to thank you all for having me. So thanks to Mike Coor for orchestrating this, and Mike Solis for chatting with him. A lot of the footage that I used here was taken by my friend Carson Lako. And then that video that you guys saw at the very beginning is a guy used to live in Colorado by the name Trevor Tanner, who ran a very popular website called Fly Carpet. So with that, my part of the presentation is done, and I'd love to address any questions you guys might have.
That was great, Luke. Thanks for thanks for coming on first and foremost, and enlightening us to what's actually living in some of those backwaters. So that's pretty exciting to see. There were some questions that I think would just maybe jump right into it, and
Okay.
and maybe I think the most interesting thing about carp fishing has to do with mulberries, right? And so let's start with this. How do you imitate a mulberry, or what does a mulberry fly look like, or what type of materials are you using?
Sure. Yeah, real good question. My favorite, if I'm in situations where fish will eat dries, is deer hair. I like using natural materials. So I'll use a little bit of a heavier hook and deer hair. And that's one of my favorite patterns to do. For example, a heavier hook, I like to use like a Gamakatsu C14S. I suppose people won't be able to see it. It's just a Gamakatsu glow bug hook. Other materials you could use to make them float are just foam, strips and pieces of foam cut up. You can tie it various ways to a hook. Really, if you're a fly tyer or even trying to do it, the main thing is that you've got a fly that will plop, or that you can at least hit hard onto the water and looks somewhat like a berry. Doesn't need to be the perfect exact color. One thing I didn't really get into is berries can range from white to kind of dark red or purple or black. And some berries ripen white. So you can really have a range of colors that might work, but purple's a go-to. Otherwise, you can also use like a thicker purple chenille that might sink a bit more, but will have a nice plop to it if you're going to fish a little bit more by feel.
Sounds good. And remind me again, what's the best month for the berry hatch? When can we expect to see that?
Sure. Yeah. So generally mid June to mid July.
Okay, got it.
Yep.
Here's an interesting question related to that. Will carp ever take will they take a mulberry fly even if there aren't berry trees on the shoreline?
So I think as long as there are mulberry trees on that body of water, I think it's always worth a try. I think when berries are going, and if there are berries on that body of water, a lot of the time carp are going to know that there are berries, and they don't know if they're under a berry tree or not. All they know is when something falls into the water. So it's always worth a try, because my bet is they'll go for it, especially if you're on moving water where they're used to them, maybe the current bringing them some food.
Could we talk about some of the basics, like what weight rod you're using, what type of fly line, leader, tippet, anything special that you're doing?
Great question. Yeah, this is something I really didn't get into. I was kind of flying high giving an overview. So really anything from a 5 weight up to an 8 or even a 10 weight, depending on your body of water. So my go-to is a 7 weight. Maybe that's the best way to put it. I love a 7 weight. You can get away with it on almost all standard carping things. So standard carping things being freshwater carp situations that aren't Lake Michigan. A 7 weight will do you great. For a line, I love just a regular true to weight forward line. That's what I prefer. That way I can cast and the line doesn't hit too heavy. If I'm in really clear water, I might use a 9-foot leader, but most of the time I use about a 5-foot leader. I find that it gives me really great control for the drag and drop. And especially if fish are looking down, they're never going to notice your leader length. The way more important thing is that you've got control over your fly. And then I use 20-pound terminal tippet. If you use Maxima, something like 12 is probably just fine. I use Orvis and Scientific Angler tippets, and 20-pound is about the right diameter that I like.
Okay. And what are you doing for a hook set? Is it a gentle hook set, or are you ripping it?
Just a snappy trout set. Yep.
Okay.
So a lot of the time for standard carp fishing, you're going to be fishing a situation where the fish is picking it up, going down at the fly, and just the anatomy of a carp anyways, their mouth sort of opens a bit towards the bottom, and if you lift it up, the hook is just going to go straight up into their top lip. It's yep, there's no reason to do anything but a trout set most of the time.
Here's a couple of interesting questions. Do you eat them? Do you smoke them, put them in a can, bake them?
I actually started keeping some carp last year. So I went out with a friend in April and we arrowed a couple to smoke. And then I kept a few during mulberry season as well, where they'd kind of just been eating mulberries for a couple of weeks. And I kept a few then. And for the most part, they all turned out fantastic. I had one that didn't turn out quite as good. And I got to figure that out. But they really can be pretty excellent. I put them in a fish dip that was a hit in several social situations.
Nice. Are there bycatches when you're out there? I know you mentioned catfish. Somebody mentioned, do you ever fish for bowfin?
So bowfin are probably besides buffalo, and I don't ever get buffalo as a bycatch. It might just be my experience. I've presented on a lot of buffalo. They just don't eat flies like I wish they would. But besides buffalo, the most common fish that I see are probably bowfin. That being said, it's not huge numbers of them, but they also occupy those backwatery areas. And they're the other fish that you're most likely to see, especially, late spring, early summer. And they'll usually eat a carp fly. Bowfin are pretty indiscriminate.
So somebody mentioned that in a couple of those videos, like you're standing pretty close to these carp. I mean, you got in there pretty close. Are they not that spooky, or is it just maybe the water is so turbid that they just don't notice you, or or do you really take your time and like sneak up on these fish?
Yeah, so it's sort of all the above. Carp are definitely very spooky. So when we're sneaking up on fish, we whisper. If I'm on a flat and I start talking, we'll often spook a bunch of fish. Or if somebody starts talking, we'll often spook a bunch of fish. Sometimes, you can be surprised at how much talking you can get away with. But that's why, as a general rule of thumb, I whisper, because they can hear the vibrations through the water. They're really sensitive. But that being said, if you are sneaking, it's astounding how close you can get to them, which is really important because with such a small dinner plate and target area to cast to, getting close is extremely advantageous. So, yep, I usually like to get within 2 rod lengths if possible.
As far as access goes, do you really need a boat to get into this? Can you, like, how much can you do wade fishing? I know I've got a friend who actually has a stand-up paddleboard that she uses to go out and carp fish, but like, how big of an investment do you need to make in like a boat, or can you wade fish and find success doing that?
You definitely can wade fish and find success. Yeah, I did it for years. I think for me, the boat, a boat certainly opens up water. But from a guiding perspective, it also makes my job easier because I can help sneak up on fish, and then it's, safer and more comfortable and a host of other things. But there's a lot of places you can wade fish for carp. Especially if we're talking in Wisconsin. First of all, we've got tons of water. So I mean, the first thing to do is just during some of those times a year where stuff is happening, and so in the summer, or anytime in May when the water temps are getting up to about 60, 65, watching for the spawn. Finding those fish is the key thing. There's a lot of things I could have talked about tonight. Reading water is one of them. So you start to learn the water to look for. If you're on a river that moves a bit faster, look for big, slow eddies that aren't super deep. Those are going to be go-to spots to look for carp in the summer. If you're on a lake or a really big, slow body of water, just look along the banks, especially if there's silt, or especially if there's cattails. Looking along those areas, carp love that stuff in the summer.
Okay.
So I hope that kind of maybe helps give people an idea of what to look for if they're going out on their own. Yeah,
I think so. Do you have any favorite flies? Like, does that change as like early season versus late season versus like anytime it's not berry season?
Right. Good question. A lot of my fly selection doesn't change throughout the summer. That stays pretty consistent. So especially once it gets warm. One of the main rules of thumb, a friend just reminded me of this the other day. If you think of your thumbnail as a great starting point for like a hook size, and then building a fly that's not too much bigger or too much beyond that, they like to take advantage of what's nearby. So if they see something that looks foody that falls near their face, a lot of the time you're gonna get an eat if you've made a good presentation. So sometimes that can help to not necessarily worry about fly pattern. Having said that, here, a couple of my fly patterns are just a simple pink worm with bead chain eyes. I can grab one quick here. This is just an extremely easy tie that you guys might be able to see here. Maybe not, but just not a big fly. I err on the side of small in terms of fly size. Not much longer than 1.5 inches or so, especially for the main body. For the main body, I shoot for a little under 1 inch, maybe. And then actually another fly pattern that I love, this is one of my go-tos, and I'll also just promote my buddy Dan's book. This fly is called the Black Betty, and it just makes a great, pretty visible pattern. Black is really easy to see, especially in darker water. And then this fly is decently weighted. So it does really well just getting down, or if it's windy, controlling from the wind. And again, that's a fly that's not super huge. And if you're looking for another resource for carp flies, This Orvis Beginner's Guide to Carp Flies has 101 patterns in it and is a really great guide for using them too.
That sounds perfect.
Yeah, those are honestly my two go-to patterns. Yep.
Yeah, they're not super selective. Like it's more presentation. Do you think?
In my experience, it's presentation. Sometimes I'll stumble across fish that are being really fussy and it's just not happening. And a lot of the time I look for fish that are exhibiting a bit of a different behavior. That being said, if the only fish that are available to you are those really fussy fish, some things that you can do are really scale down the weight on your fly and scale down the size. Like with a lot of fish, I think going down in size is a really good thing to do. So using like a smaller soft tackle or even like a soft tackle you might use for trout, are great things to do if you've got fish that are sort of maybe just sitting a foot or so below the surface and not really exhibiting a ton of aggressive feeding behavior. Those are things that, or even fishing a lightly weighted egg. Those are all things that you can do in other situations that might get you fish that you otherwise, wouldn't be getting with the tactics I've kind of talked about so far.
Yeah. Do you have any favorite YouTubers out there who are doing the carp fishing videos you could recommend?
Good question. I have not gone down those rabbit holes in a while. The fly carp. So in terms of educational stuff, that guy Fly Carpin in the video I showed you is going to be one of the best things to watch. I think I stumbled across some carp fishing videos by this guy. I think it's called like Drew Looking Fishy or something like that. I can't remember his name, and you might have to dig, but it's either he has a YouTube and an Instagram, but he has some really cool videos pushing around on a paddle board, catching, I think, both common carp and grass carp. And the grass carp he's catching a lot on dry flies. Those are some of the favorite videos I've watched. And then there's also one that I saw years ago of a guy somewhere in Asia catching common carp on dry flies on a river and move it with, moving water on bamboo. Someday when that surfaces, I'm going to share it all over the place again. But that's all I have to say about that. I'm not sure who's doing the best carp YouTube videos right now.
I know Tom Rosenbauer has some stuff on carp fishing on Orvis fly fishing.
Yeah, Tom's always a great resource. That's a good point there. Here's an interesting question from my friend Andy. If you see a large school of carp mouthing on the surface, what's the best tactic to use? How would you approach that situation?
Great question. I would probably lean towards an egg or something similar, something really lightly weighted. One of my favorite flies to use for fish that are maybe clooping on the surface. That's kind of what it's called when they're just sort of almost by appearances indiscriminately kind of just mouthing. If they're doing that, I really like to fish unweighted like woolly worm or something really light like that, or just like a weightless egg pattern. And I would still probably use a drag and drop presentation. You got to play it a little bit carefully so you don't spook them because they're right there. But the main thing is to just get it nearby and then let it drop really slowly within their vision, or maybe even just twitch it into their line of sight as slow as you can. That would be my starting point for fish like that. But I also wouldn't be surprised if they end up being frustrating. So
yeah. Here's an interesting comment and a question. It says in low water in my area, big nymphs work really well. Yes, what's your go-to nymph for carp, and do you fish big nymphs for them?
Sure, I guess I'm not sure what qualifies as big. So a lot of carp flies, might be categorized just as big nymphs. And in the summer, anything that's kind of damsel, dragonfly nymph sized is going to be something that's going to be a decent go-to, especially if you got weeds. So here I'll just quickly pull out a couple of flies. So this is just a by the hand perspective of how big my black betties are. And that's And then here is a fly that I really like to fish for fish that are in weeds in the summer, in kind of dragon or damselfly situations. That's one I picked up from Tim Flagler. It's called a Barama bugger, and I tie it with bead chains so that it kind of rides hook point up. But that's about as big as I fish for standard carp situations. There are days where I've gone out with friends and we just try to see how big of a fly we can catch them on. And you definitely catch them on stuff that's bigger than that. But it's, I don't have those bigger flies as a go-to.
Okay. Somebody else here reiterating that it's weird at first, but whispering is a must. So
good. Okay. Yeah. I'm glad I'm not the only one. Yeah.
Yeah. Got to whisper when you're out there. That's good to know.
Yeah. It also gives you this like intensity and focus, it's like you're out there hunting.
Here's an interesting one. And I'll take a liking to this answer because I walk this area quite a bit. Any tips to catch the monster carp that cruise by the Monona Terrace on Lake Monona where I walk?
You know what? I have never even tried to catch those fish. And so now I feel like I need to, but cruising fish, I would have a lightly weighted damselfly that you can get in front of their face that isn't going to sink too fast. But
yeah, I know that's gonna be a tough spot to approach a fish. The bike lane's right there, and it's really heavily trafficked. But
yeah,
watch the back cast.
Yeah.
You're more likely to catch a biker than you are a carp, probably. But,
yeah, hope they get close and go for a bow and arrow cast.
Yeah, so somebody was asking about that. Could you hold up that book that you had one more time?
Yeah.
It was an Orvis book, right? The Orvis Beginner's
Yep.
Guide to Carp.
Yep. Orvis Beginner's Guide to Carp Fishing. It's by Dan Frazier. Just a really useful book. And I mean, Beginner's Guide isn't an inappropriate title, but it's also just kind of a standard reference for, this was published in 2014. So there's certainly been carp flies that have come out since then, but this has got really still all of the carp flies that I kind of consider standard, for a lot of people's boxes.
All right, I'm gonna wrap this up, and I'm gonna ask you one last question.
Okay.
Somebody wanted to go, spend a day in the boat with you. What does that day look like? And how do they, like, how far in advance are we booking? Things like that.
Oh, really good question. So I do mainly kind of two different trips. There's like more sight fishing things. And so that we're going to be in probably my towee skiff on bigger, slower water. Like I generally guide the Rock River system. So probably on the main rock itself. And we will be either poling or rowing in pretty shallow water and sight fishing for carp. That's usually an all day affair. But you can check my website for half day or 3/4 day trips, but usually starting sometime around 8 o'clock, it's really kind of banker's hours type thing. You can get out earlier with kind of limited advantage. So that's kind of the sight fishing trip, pulling around backwaters, maybe on the bank, some of those things I talked about in the talk. And then some of the berry floats are a little bit more of like a familiar drift boat experience where we might be floating a river with current, using a drift boat. You're casting a little bit more. And, that's something where a lot of the time just starting, 8 a.m. or whatever time kind of works for people in the morning, because when they're eating berries, it's just, that's all they're doing. They're not taking a break for daylight or for night, or anything. So does that kind of get at what you meant by the question?
Yeah, absolutely. And the Rock River is pretty big. Do you want to narrow it down a little bit? Like, where would you meet somebody? Or if you want to say that, I don't know. No spots, that's fine too. But
no, it's all good. Yeah. So it is a big river. So but generally my trips are no further south than Edgerton, no further north than Horicon. That's still a pretty big range, but Yep, eastern Wisconsin. We might be, all the way up in the marsh. We might be kind of on the lower end down by Fort Atkinson.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
most likely in between. You asked one more question. You asked about, I just remembered this. You asked when to book. If
Yes.
someone's out there and they're really interested in a berry trip, I would get a hold of me now. So most stuff in June is taken up. And at this point, I'm starting to fill up stuff for July. And, beginning of July through mid-July is going to be the remaining of the best stuff. And then there's still going to be a bit going into the end of July. It's just it might not be as much of the dry fly takes. You might be getting them on sunk flies or something like that. But if you want to do like spring stuff or later summer and really want to do the sight fishing stuff, that stuff is pretty open right now. And you might even be able to contact me. And if you want to get on a list of, when the conditions are good in the spring, if you're really interested in that, just get a hold of me. And that's something, I can put you on a call list where when the conditions are good, I just let you know. Otherwise, there's no rush at this point for the later summer stuff. But if you really want to get out, I guess my rule of thumb is, I would just say, just book when you know you want to do it.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. And, thanks again for coming on. And I know it's not and thanks for everybody for joining us tonight. I didn't know how this was going to play out, and it's not our traditional, talking trout. And, but it's great that there's a lot of interest in this. And, I think, regardless of what species we're chasing, we're all just anglers at heart. And so, the thrill of it is still the thrill of it. And so, thanks for coming out. I'll do a plug, make sure if you're going to book a trip, make sure you tip your guides well. These folks are really working hard and sharing their knowledge and making sure you have a pleasurable day on the water. So, make sure you get them they do well, give them an extra 20% on top of that to help cover some of their expenses. It's not an easy way to make a living. So, but we're glad folks like you, Luke, are like carving out this niche for yourself out there. And it sounds like a really neat experience. And I'm going to add it to my bucket list. So we'll have to get out one of these days.
I'm a really bad salesman, but if I came across as a good salesman in this, it's just because that's how much I believe it's a cool thing. So yeah, just neat. So thanks for having me.
My daughter just booked a trip with you, Luke.
Oh,
Laura Diaz.
Oh, yep, she sure did. Yep.
So
yep.
Perfect.
And are you coming?
Yeah, I'm coming with.
Alrighty.
Way to go, Dad. That's perfect. Awesome. So thanks again, everybody, for joining us tonight. Really appreciate seeing everybody. Stay healthy, stay safe. We'll be back next month. We've got Matt Mitro from the DNR. He's they're basically the resident fish scientist. So he's going to kind of update us on some recent studies that they've been doing with regards to trout in Wisconsin. So we should be excited for that. So, but thanks again for spending the evening with us. Have a good night.
Thanks, Mike.